Welcome, everyone. We'll give you a second to get all settled in, but while we're waiting, feel free to put in the chat where you're tuning in from today. I'd love to know where our Terps are. Welcome, Amanda. Welcome, Washington, D.C. Me too. Dr. Lids, not to put him on the spot, but he is on campus today. He's on the beautiful College Park campus. Catherine from Del Rey, sunny Florida. Welcome, welcome. If you're just tuning in, feel free to put in the chat where you're tuning in from. Oh my gosh, Ellen from Israel, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Lovely. Charlottesville, beautiful. Hi, Charles. Silver Spring, Arlington. Hi, Elaine. Welcome, welcome. All right, we'll give folks just one more minute, but if you haven't told us where you're tuning in from, feel free to just drop it in the chat. Israel, I can't get over. That's exciting. Delaware, awesome. Hi, Mary. We got Terps from all over today. All right. You can still type in the chat if you want, but we're going to get started.
Greetings, Terp alums. Can you remember the feeling of sitting in class, captivated by a professor's passionate teaching that sparked your curiosity? Well, today you'll get to experience just that all over again. Thank you for joining Alumni Association's new lecture series, For You. Through these events, we are excited to share with you the groundbreaking research from our world-class faculty who are helping us solve the grand challenges of our time. Now get your notepads ready and don't be afraid to ask questions, but don't worry, there won't be any pop quizzes at the end. Welcome back to the classroom and go Terps!
So Dr. Lids, I hope you heard that, no pop quizzes at the end. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Ellie Garrity, and I am the Director of Alumni Career Programs here at the Alumni Association. We're so excited that you were able to join us today for today's faculty speaker series with Dr. Jeffrey Lids, the Language Seed. Welcome, Dr. Lids. We have a lot of information to cover today, but we will take questions at the end of the webinar. So feel free to submit any of your questions using the chat function on the bottom of your Zoom panel. This webinar is being recorded, so by participating, you acknowledge and consent to your image, likeness, or voice being recorded. Speaking of recording, a recording of this webinar will be shared with you to the email that you use to register for this event. And you can also access our closed captioning function by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom panel. Okay, so our UMD faculty member, Jeff, is a professor of linguistics at the University of Maryland, where he directs the project on children's language learning and the Infant and Children's Studies Consortium. He's a member of the executive committees of the Maryland Language Science Center and the Neuroscience and Cognitive Science Program. Lid's work examines how children acquire their first language. This work uses a combination of psychological, computational, and comparative linguistics tools in order to separate out the contributions of human nature and the environment in the acquisition of language. Dr. Lids, I'm looking forward to your presentation today, and I will hand it right over to you.
Okay. Let's see. Good. Can you see?
Great. We can see everything.
All right. Great. Well, thanks, Ellie, for that introduction and for organizing these talks. This is a fun idea. And thank all of you other people for being here, alums. So today I want to talk about one of the most fundamental aspects of human nature, language. There are over 8,000 languages spoken in the world. Communities of humans in the farthest corners of the world all have language. Wherever you find people, you're going to find language there. Interestingly, language is kind of robust to atypical sensory experience. So in the absence of hearing, deaf people are nonetheless able to create language in the manual modality. When deaf people form a community, even if none of them has a language already, somehow a language emerges among them. And so all of this suggests that language is sort of nearly definitional of being human. Furthermore, there are other creatures that exist in our environments that don't seem to reflect the same capacity for language. The creatures that in our environments that talk are the humans, and the creatures that don't are, well, everything else. The latter, the cats, the houseplants, whatever, given every benefit of exposure, don't acquire language. Presumably, the difference lies in the basic mental machinery of our species. So language looks like a kind of species level property. Now, let's turn to this creature. So this creature does not seem to show any signs of having a language, certainly not if what we mean is that she can produce and understand sentences like the rest of us. So does that mean she's not human? If speaking a language is definitional of being a human, then our children, our babies, are they not human? Well, so what you're probably thinking is that there's more to language than producing and understanding sentences. Rather, it's the capacity for language, the capacity to create language that makes this creature and all humans special. So in that notion of capacity, we can make a kind of analogy. A caterpillar is not a butterfly, but at the same time, only a caterpillar can become a butterfly. So you could wrap a slug up in a cocoon, but it will not at some point later emerge as a butterfly. So, so in one sense, the creature on the very left is the very same kind of creature as the one all the way on the right. But in another very real sense, they're really very different kinds of creatures. They have very different behavioral capacities, that they might eat different things, they move differently, that they're just very different kinds of things. In fact, it's like a discovery of science, or at least folk science, that one grows out of the other, because you would never guess by encountering a caterpillar and a butterfly in the wild that they were the same creature. So, so by the same token, if we judge by superficial appearances and behavioral repertoire, we might conclude that there are 6 creatures here as easily as we conclude that there's one. So when it comes to language, how is it that we can think about that capacity, that it defines the special property of the species, such that it emerges externally like wings on the butterfly over time? So how does that happen? So if we can move that analogy just one step to the side, let's consider a seed, which given proper environmental conditions will grow into a plant. If you leave it on the desk, it just sits there, right? But you have to like put it in soil, give it some water, some sunshine, and then it will become a plant. Now, if we consider a pebble, something which is externally just like the seed, why does it not grow into a plant given the same environmental conditions? So the seed grows into a plant because of its internal structure, plus exposure to soil, water, and light. Caterpillar grows into a butterfly because of its internal structure, plus the food that it eats. And we can think of language in that same way, as a basic capacity that will emerge because of the child's internal structure, plus whatever exposure to the language provides. So what we want to ask is, what is the internal structure of the child that allows her to grow a language? What should we look for to identify the structure of that initial seed? But before we can even do that, we have to understand how the seed grows into a plant. So we just need to watch what happens, you know? So we need to figure out what properties that seed has. So what does the seed do such that soil, water, and sunlight make it potent, right? So what is the internal structure of the mind such that exposure to languages makes a language emerge in our minds? But we need to do two things. We need to first identify the key features that define linguistic knowledge, and then we want to see how those emerge in development. And what we'll see is that from basically the earliest times we can measure, babies show these signature properties of human language, properties which go far beyond what they might be expected to learn from experience alone. So let's talk for a minute about what those fundamental properties are. The most basic property of human language is the capacity to produce and understand sentences that we've never heard before. So for example, here's a new sentence that you've probably never heard before. My sister's goldfish tried to convince me that banjo players always drive more expensive cars than linguistics professors. That's a brand new sentence. Pretty sure nobody's ever uttered it before, and yet we have no difficulty understanding what it means. Here's another one. What did your sister's goldfish try to convince you that banjo players always drive? So that's related to that other one. So there's another novel sentence which you've never heard before. This one is a question. But not every novel arrangement of words that you know is a possible sentence. So for example, here's another one. Who did your sister's goldfish try to convince you that banjo players always drive more expensive cars than? So like, try it as hard, you can kind of tell what it means. In fact, here's what it means. Your sister tried to convince you that banjo players always drive more expensive cars than somebody. Who was it? You know, so like that meaning is accessible to us, but it's not the kind of thing we can express in a sentence. So there's something that distinguishes the possible sentences from the impossible sentence. So we have this capacity, which allows us to produce and understand new sentences, but it's constrained in some way. Another way we can kind of see that property is in this famous poem by Lewis Carroll. So 'twas brillig and the slithy toads did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the boar groves and mome rats outgrave. So what's interesting about this poem is that we can detect a kind of a meaning here. There's a structure to the language that is independent of knowing the meanings of the word. So we have a sense of the scene here without knowing what brillig or toads means. We still know something about what's going on here. On the other hand, we know based on the position of the words in the sentences that brillig probably describes a property of the scene. It means something like early or foggy or quiet, but not the name of a creature. On the other hand, the opposite is true for the word toves, which probably does describe a creature and not, say, the state of fogginess or being early or whatever, right? So, there's structure here which seems to contribute meaning independent of the meanings of the words. And interestingly, if you take those same words and say reverse them, so outgrave, rats, mome, the, and, borogrove, the, were, mimsy, all, then you don't get any meaning at all. So there's a kind of a structure here. And that structure is partly determined by categories. So all languages have categories. So for example, the difference between nouns and verbs. So we can, we can say April can eat, April can think, April can open it, but we can't, in those same positions, you can't put nouns. So like April can elephant, April can book, April can truth. Those are weird things to say. And vice versa. The places where we can put nouns are not the places where we can put verbs. So the distributional properties, the places in sentences where words occur, are indicative of their category. So members of these categories can be identified from their shared distribution. So we have categories as part of language. Second, words can combine into phrases, and those phrases have internal structure. So if we think about a phrase like the big yellow bottle, well, we can think of each adjective here as further restricting the meaning of the expression. So for example, you have bottles, bottle means bottles, right? And then if you add yellow to that, then that restricts the bottles to the subset of bottles that are yellow. If you say big yellow bottles, that'll restrict that further to the set of bottles that are big and yellow, right? Or the set of yellow bottles that are big, right? So we just keep, the way we modify things is a way of restricting interpretation. And those interpretations are hierarchically structured in the sense that each word applies to the thing which is already combined before. So big applies to yellow bottle, right? So it restricts yellow bottles, right? So it doesn't mean any bottle that's big, it means big for a yellow bottle. Okay. So we have hierarchical structure. And the third property is that there are dependencies between words in a sentence. So take, for example, the verb bring. Bring is what we call a transitive verb. It requires a noun phrase, a direct object, something to its right. So we can say April, is April bringing the toy? And if we eliminate that direct object, then the sentence becomes somewhat weird. If we say, is April bringing? We go, what? That's odd, right? Now, what's interesting too is that those dependencies, so that dependency between bring and a noun phrase to its right, sometimes they can be lifted. For example, they can be lifted in a question we call a WH question, a question with a word like what or who, right? So when we say, what is April bringing? Here the word what seems to play the same role in the sentence as the word toy does above. Okay, so what functions as the object of bring, even though it occurs very far away from it, right? And in fact, it can occur arbitrarily far away from it and still bear that same relation. So we can say, what did Sam say that April is bringing? Or what did you hear that Sam said that April is bringing? Or what did Kim report that you heard that Sam said that April is bringing? And always we can create this dependency between the phrase what and the verb bring at a distance, right? So that long distance dependency property, that one word depends on another far away, that's a property that all human languages seem to have. Also, the fact that they never occur at the same time, that is what and the toy, they never occur at the same time. You can't say, what is April bringing the toy? That indicates that they're both realizations of the same underlying abstract category. Similar to the way that Superman and Clark Kent are two realizations of the same individual, right? You never see them in the same place. That's how you know they're kind of the same guy, right? So that's the same thing with what and the toy. They're playing the same role in the sentence, even though they never can co-occur. Okay, so now what we want to think about is how do we find out whether babies have that kind of structure? So we're talking about whether babies have the fundamental property, the seed for human language. And so what we're going to do is look at 18-month-olds. So a typical 18-month-old has a vocabulary of between 5 and 40 words. Mostly when they make sentences or make utterances, it's just one word at a time. Sometimes they produce 2 or 3 word utterances, very rarely. So they might say, mommy sit, Kim hungry, where passy. It doesn't sound like adult grammatical English. What we want to find out is that structure actually in there anyway? So I wanted to show you this little video of, this is something I found on YouTube, of just a typical, actually this is kind of a precocious 18-month-old. So let's see if we can watch it.
Hi, I'm Mommy. It's Anna. Mommy, sit down.
What's your favorite color?
Red,
What's your favorite food?
yellow. Mommy. Kit Kat. Mama, wanna ocean.
Okay, so on the one hand, you might look at this child and think like, wow, how sophisticated, you know, like she knows the words to Jingle Bells, sort of, you know. On the other hand, you might think like, boy, it's a long way from that creature to long distance dependencies that are involved in questions. And so that's kind of what we're trying to figure out is, can we probe the mind of the 18-month-old to see if those structures are actually in there, okay? Now, you can't just ask the 18-month-old what a sentence means or whether a certain sentence is a possible sentence or not. They'll just tell you what they had for dinner or where they hid the Play-Doh or something like that, right? So we need to invent kind of indirect measures that reveal what they know without relying on explicit reasoning about language or conscious knowledge, right? Which kind of minimize the effort that would be required for them to show us their knowledge. So I'm going to show you 3 different techniques we use for examining linguistic knowledge in infants and toddlers, all of which are basically based on measures of attention. How long will they watch a video? Okay, and that's going to be a signal for something that they understand. So we're going to start with grammatical categories, parts of speech categories. Okay, so we said that languages are made up of words and phrases that fall into particular categories. And maybe the most basic kind of category are the parts of speech categories like nouns and verbs. And as we saw before, words from the same category share distributional features. So in other words, they occur in the same kinds of sentences, and words from different categories occur in different kinds of sentences, different positions in the sentence. Moreover, words from the same category tend to have similar meanings. So nouns tend to identify kinds of objects, but not exclusively. And verbs tend to identify kinds of events, but again, not exclusively. But these are tendencies that words from different categories seem to share kinds of meanings. Okay. So in order to probe whether babies have an understanding of those categories, we're going to capitalize on that relation between the category and the kind of meaning that it can express. Okay. So we're going to use a technique called habituation. So habituation is something that's used across all human psychology. And basically habituation is a phenomenon where with repeated exposure to some stimulus, you get less and less interested in it, right? It's like watching the same TikTok video over and over again. Eventually you get bored with it, right? So if you see something over and over again, you get less and less interested in it. So for example, in this graph over here, you see if you start at the beginning, then attention might be high. And then if you keep exposing the child to the same stimulus, their attention is going to drop, okay? And then what's going to happen is once their attention drops, we're going to, we hit some criterion. So, okay, after this, something's going to change. So either we play something similar to what we played before, in which case we expect looking time to stay low. They're sort of still bored with it, or we'll change something. And if we change something, and they notice that change, then their attention should recover. And that's what we call dishabituation. So recovery of attention with a new stimulus. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a kind of habituation study with 18-month-olds. Okay, and we're going to use the link between syntactic category and meaning as a probe for their knowledge of the syntactic category. So we know, as we said before, that nouns often refer to objects and verbs often refer to events. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little video. This is just like what the baby would see. Okay.
Oh, look, it's a crotch. Do you see the crotch? Wow, it's a crotch. Do you see the crotch? Hey.
Okay, so the baby will watch that over and over again. And then that'll be alternating with something like this.
Oh, look, it's doking. Do you see it doking? Wow, it's doking. Do you see it doking? Hey.
Okay, so now what did we do? We had two novel words, crotch and doke, and they were in different environments. So crotch was used in the position where nouns typically go. And that sentence, it's a crotch, do you see the crotch or whatever it was, right? It was paired with an event of the penguin spinning over and over again. So if you know that words presented as nouns are likely to refer to objects, then having seen that scene, you should think that crotch means something like penguin. Okay. Then we showed you the one with doking. It was spinning, rotating around like this, right? So in that case, if you know that doke, because it's a verb, it likely refers to an event, then you should think that doke means something like rotate. Okay. Okay, so then after we habituate, so they see that over and over again, those two things in alternation until they get bored. And then we make a switch, okay? So there's two kinds of switches. One switch, well, both switches are the same. We switch which sentence goes with which video, okay? So they've seen the video, they've heard the sentences. We just wanna know, do they notice the connection between the sentence and the video? But more particularly, do they notice that with respect to the category of the novel word in those videos, right, in the audio, right? So if they just notice the connection between the sentences and the videos, then they should dishabituate when we switch which one goes with which. But if they learn the novel word and assigned it a meaning on the basis of its syntactic category, whether it was a noun or a verb, then they should do different things in the two different kinds of switches, right? So if they use the fact that crotch is a noun to learn that it means penguin, then when we show them the switch,
oh, look, it's a crotch.
they
Do
just
you
say,
see
yeah,
the crotch?
it's still a crotch.
Wow, it's a crotch.
I thought crotch meant
Do
penguin.
you see the
It's
crotch?
still a crotch, so they should be not so interested in that. That's what they were habituated to, that crotch means penguin. Okay. Then we look at the other case.
Oh, look, it's doking. Do you see it doking? Wow, it's doking.
Now they should be
Do you
puzzled.
see it doking?
They should be puzzled because they thought, well, doke was a verb and doke refers to this event that I saw before. And the event that I saw before was this rotating event. And now you're saying it's doking and it's doing something different. And so that should make me go, wait a second, I thought I knew what doke meant, but maybe I don't. right? And so if they know the syntactic categories, then they should dishabituate differently to the noun switch versus the verb switch, okay? And so first we just show you what the habituation looks like. So, okay, so here we say they start off watching about 25 seconds. They'll just keep watching those videos, for almost half a minute, right? Then when they get bored, they look away. If they look back, then it keeps going. If they look away for 2 seconds, we just start over again. We keep going. What happens is over time, their listening decreases to the point where it gets down below 10 seconds. Okay, and at that point, that's where we do the switch. Okay, and so now here's what happens. So here's the condition on the left. So the blue is the end of habituation. Okay, so that's just how much they were paying attention when they got bored. Okay, that's in all three of these. The yellow is how much they paid attention after the criterion. So after we made the switch. So the first one is just a control condition where we just keep everything the same. In that case, they continue to habituate. They continue to decrease their listening. Okay, the middle pair is the noun condition. So we said it's a protch, and it was before it was cartwheeling. Now it's rotating, right? And then we say, look, it's a protch, and they stay looking about the same time that they looked before. But in the verb switch, when we said it's doking and we switched which event was happening, then now they dishabituate. Now they notice that change. They're like, wait a second, something weird is going on here. Okay, so that noticing that something weird is going on only in one of the changes and not the other, that indicates that they knew something about what grammatical category, noun or verb, the novel words were presented as, and what their expectations are about the link between those categories and those meanings. So we know that by 18 months, they expect novel nouns to refer to objects and that they expect novel verbs to refer to events, which means in turn that they know how to recognize in their language which words are nouns and which words are verbs on the basis of their distributional properties. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Babies, they can't even talk, they haven't been to school yet. Nonetheless, they know the difference between nouns and verbs. I don't know how many of you could explicitly say what the difference between nouns and verbs are, but these babies seem to know it. Okay, the second property that we want to talk about is hierarchical structure, right? So we said that sentences have hierarchical structure. So one of the ways that we can diagnose hierarchical structure is by the use of like pronouns. So for example, if I say, I like this bottle, not that one, what I mean is not that yellow bottle, right? So that one replaces a whole phrase. And that's possible only if those two words form a unit. Okay, so we have the yellow bottle. So this is the structure because yellow bottle can be replaced with a pronoun. This is not the structure because in this structure, where it would be just flat or a string of words, right? Yellow bottle is not a unit, so it can't be replaced with a pronoun. So what we want to do is see the babies at 18 months, do they know this property, that pronouns replace phrases? We're going to use a slightly different method here. This method is called preferential looking. So in this method, the baby sits in a high chair in front of a TV screen, and there's two images on the TV screen. And there's a camera on top of the TV screen, which is zoomed in on the baby's face. And we measure 30 times a second, whether they're looking at the image on the left or the image on the right. So you can see, for example, in this image, the baby is looking at the block, and in this image, she's looking at the train. Okay, and we just go through, every 30th of a second, we say, are they looking to the left or are they looking to the right? As a function of what they heard. Okay, so for example, if we said, where's the train? Then what we'd see over time is, well, the baby is going to look at the train some, and they're going to look at the block, and then we say, where's the train? And then here they're going to look at the train more, then they might go back to the block as they get bored. What we're going to do is we're going to average across many, many trials and many, many kids till we get something that looks like this. This tells us on average, after we said train, do they look more at the train? Then that means that they understood that the word train means train, right? Okay, that's the basic version, okay? So at any given point, around half the kids are looking at the train, half the kids are looking at the block, right? That's in the beginning. And then once they hear train, then they switch so that more of them are looking at the train. And that's going to be the signal that they understood what the word meant. So we're going to do something like that in the case of yellow bottles and the pronoun one, okay? So we're going to familiarize babies to an object, the yellow bottle. I'll show you a video in a second. And then after they see that, we're going to show them two images. a blue bottle and a yellow bottle, and we're going to ask them, what do you see now? Okay. In that case, they probably will have a preference for the blue bottle since they haven't seen that before. And there's no reason in the sentence to guide their attention one way or another. Then when we see another one, well, what should they do? Well, it depends on what they think one means. So if they know that the sentences are hierarchically structured, then one should refer to yellow bottle. So when we say, do you see another one? They should look at the yellow bottle. On the other hand, if they don't know that sentences are hierarchically structured, then they might think that one refers to bottle, in which case they would look at the blue one because it's new and interesting. Okay. Okay, so here's a video just to get a sense of what this looks like.
Oh, look, a yellow bottle. Do you see a yellow bottle? Look, a yellow bottle. Here's a yellow bottle. Here's a yellow bottle too. Do you see a yellow bottle? Look, do you see another one? Where's another one?
So in the control condition, what do you see now? What we expect is, since they've seen the yellow bottle a million times, they'll be interested in the blue bottle. So they'll direct their attention to the blue bottle. Then the interesting case is the anaphoric condition, where we say, do you see another one? Anaphor just means pronoun. So do you see another one? Okay, so in that case, if they have hierarchical structure, they think that the yellow bottle has yellow bottle as a part. Then when we say, do you see another one? They should prefer the yellow bottle. On the other hand, if they thought the structure was flat and the yellow bottle were just a string of words, then the pronoun should only be able to pick out things which are a chunk, in this case, bottle. And if it picks out bottle, then either one of these is a bottle, and so they should have a preference for the new one. Okay, so let's see what happened. Okay, so here's data. So the yellow bars are looking towards the familiar object, the yellow bottle. The blue bars are looking towards the novel object, the blue bottle. Okay, on the left is the control condition. The y-axis is how much time they spend looking. What we see is in the control condition, they show a preference for the blue bottle, the novel thing, right? So in that case, they're looking about maybe 40% of the time at the yellow bottle. When we switch to the anaphoric condition, do you see another one? Do you see another one? Now their preference is reverse. So they prefer to look at the yellow bottle over the blue bottle in that condition. Okay, so what does this mean? So it tells us that at 18 months, babies know that one is like kind of a pronoun, and it can refer back to phrases such as the phrase yellow bottle, right? Which means that they have those phrases with hierarchical structure. Sentences are phrases embedded inside of phrases. So they have subparts that count as units. Okay, so they have hierarchical structure at 18 months. Okay. Last case is dependencies. So what do we know about babies' ability to represent dependencies between things that aren't right next to each other, right? So when we're talking about hierarchical structure, we're talking about relations between words that are right next to each other. They form a chunk, right? But here we're talking about dependencies that hold across an arbitrary distance, right? So the dependency between what and the verb bring, okay? So, so how are we gonna find out whether babies know that what functions as the direct object of bring in these kinds of questions? Okay. So the way we identify that kind of a dependency for ourselves is by noting the complementary distribution, that is the Superman Clark Kent property, between direct objects or no direct object versus the WH phrase, which dog in this case, right? So if I say the cat should hug him, that's good, that's a sentence of English. The cat should, look, a dog, the cat should hug, not a sentence of English. On the other hand, which dog should the cat hug him? That's weird, but which dog should the cat hug? That's good. So that, in other words, in the simple declarative, the cat should hug him, the direct object is required. In the question, which dog should the cat hug? The direct object is obligatorily absent, it must not be there, okay? And so what we're gonna look for is this complementary distribution between the WH phrase, which dog, and the direct object, him. Okay, we're gonna see the babies know that. Okay, so here's what we kind of expect, right? So if we could ask them, you know, like if we could ask them explicitly, how does this sound to you? here's what we would expect, right? If we say a dog, the cat should hug him, they should go, yeah, that's good, I like that. That sounds like English. If you say a dog, the cat should hug, they should go, whoop, that doesn't sound like English to me. If I say, which dog should the cat hug him? They should go, wow, I don't like that. And if I say, which dog should the cat hug? They should say, yeah, I like that. So the judgments of which sounds good and which sounds bad flip, right? In the when the direct object is there, in the declarative, it's good. And when it's there in the question, it's bad, okay? So the way we're gonna see whether babies share these kinds of judgments is using a procedure we call a sequential listening preference procedure. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just show these babies a video with some abstract shapes on it, just kind of moving around. And while they're looking at the video, we'll play sentences. As long as they look at the video, the sentences will keep playing. If they turn away, then we'll put we'll stop the audio. Interesting thing to recapture their attention, in this case, a butterfly, right? And when they look back, then we'll start the sentences again. So that all we're gonna do is just measure how well do they like to listen to these sentences, okay? Okay, so we're gonna do two conditions. So declaratives versus WH questions. So in the declaratives, sometimes the sentences will be with a direct object, the cat should hug him. Sometimes they'll be without. In the WH questions, sometimes there will be a direct object, which dog should the cat hug him? Sometimes not, which dog should the cat hug? What we're gonna measure is how long do they listen to the ones with a direct object versus the ones without a direct object in each of the two conditions. And we're gonna compare those, okay? So we're just measuring how long do they listen to these sentences. I think I can show you a little video. Yeah, here's a little video of a baby in this.
Ooh, which dog should the monkey hit her? Wow, which goose should the mouse cover him? Hey, which cow should the elephant bump him? Wow, which cat should the bunny hug her? Ooh, which bear should the dog tickle him? Hey, which bee should the frog kiss her? Hey, which giraffe should the tiger kiss? Ooh, which sheep should the puppy hit?
Now we switch.
Wow, which butterfly should the bug cover? Ooh,
So if he looks away, then the video stops and we get their attention capture. And that just continues as long as they listen, okay? Okay, so here's the data. So our y-axis now is a difference score. It's the difference between listening to ones with a direct object versus ones without a direct object. The blue is that difference for the declarative sentences, and the yellow is that difference for the WH questions. What we see is that in the declaratives, they prefer to listen to the sentences that have a direct object. And in the questions, they prefer to listen to the sentences that don't have a direct object. In other words, they listen longer to the sentences that match the pattern of their language. Okay, so these 18-month-olds seem to know this dependency between the WH phrase and the lack of a direct object, right? The WH phrase does the same thing as the direct object does in the declarative. And you can tell because, again, they like it when there's a direct object in the declarative, and they don't like it if there's a direct object in the question. Okay, so they listen longer to the sentences that match the structure of their language. So what happened here is we saw that 18-month-olds register this kind of complementary distribution, this property of the direct object being present or absent, whether it's a declarative or a question, right, between the WH phrase and the postverbal noun phrase, right? And therefore, they seem to represent this non-local dependency relation. They know that a verb can have its direct object missing only when it's in a WH question, like which dog should the cat hug? So they have this, they represent this structural relation between words that are very far apart. Remember, these are 18-month-olds. These are kids who are barely stringing two words together in a sentence. Okay? So are children human, right? Our humanity is revealed not through the use of language, not through the way that we talk, but rather through the seed that makes language possible. And that seed allows us to acquire knowledge that is really rich relative to the kinds of things that we can say. That seed shapes the way that we develop, helps us to assign structure to our linguistic experience at all stages of development. And we can see that structure in children's behavior from the earliest point that we can measure, well before their own utterances reflect that kind of linguistic sophistication. So what we see is just as the seed has a kind of internal structure that when you give it a input like water, soil, sunlight, that it'll grow into a plant, the language seed inside the mind of the learner, when given exposure to a natural language, will allow a language to grow inside the mind of the child. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Litz. I know, Liz, sorry, we have a couple questions that came up. One of them, two clarifying questions. So the first one is around the fundamental properties that you described. Does that apply to all languages? Have the studies just been done for the English language?
So about the properties themselves, they apply to all languages. So every language we find, they've got categories, they've got hierarchical structure, and they've got long distance dependencies. It's impossible to find a language without those properties. Now about the kids, so these kinds of studies have been done only in a very few languages. So, so we know that babies at around this age, 18 months, have grammatical categories like noun and verb in English, in French, in Japanese, and that's about it that's been studied. So we don't really know about all those languages, but we suspect. About a hierarchical structure, again, it's the languages where there are a lot of scientists that this has been studied, and languages where there aren't a lot of scientists that hasn't been studied as well. I did do some work on a language in South India known as Kannada. That language, well, it's actually a pretty major language with about 30 million speakers, and the kids in that language seem to show these kinds of properties as well. And for the dependencies, that our study that I just told you about was the first study to look at that in babies. So it's the first thing to find that.
And I mean, I think we could maybe take some guesses as to why the 18th month mark is important for the study, but can you talk about what led you to start with 18 months, and did you do studies at any other ages?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's interesting. So when I started studying language acquisition about 25 years ago, we were looking at kids between the ages of 3 and 6. And what we found was that almost every phenomenon in language that we looked at, by the time they were 3, they pretty much had it down. And we thought, well, that's weird. We better start looking younger if we want to see how this develops. And so we just kept kind of pushing these ages down and down and down. And so now we hit upon 18 months, and we're going to keep trying to go lower. But the other reason that 18 months is kind of a significant point is it's right around that stage when the kids are starting to put words together into more complicated utterances. And so really what we're hoping to see is that their knowledge of the structure precedes their ability to get it out of their mouths. And so those are kind of the ways that we're looking, is trying to find what's the right age, what's the right distance between when they start talking and when we think that they might understand them. So, yeah.
Right. And I'm sure a question that a lot of our parents, our alumni parents have listening in right now is, what role do parents play in helping form that? Is this just something from your study that you see kind of is innate within children as they kind of build that language seed and grow, or is there a role that parents can play in this process?
Well, so there's two answers to that question. So one is that language seed is part of what makes us human. And so in some sense, it really doesn't matter what you say to children. As long as you talk to them, eventually a language will emerge. On the other hand, we do know that the more we talk to children, the faster they learn their language, that the more that we interact with children in kind of a social way, the more sophisticated their linguistic reasoning becomes, their ability to kind of hold a longer conversation. And so it's kind of, it's beneficial to talk more to your kid, but it's not going to hurt them really if you don't talk to them.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. We have a question from Laura. Have you done any work comparing hearing impaired children who are exposed to ASL at birth by someone who's fluent versus one who is not exposed to ASL?
So I haven't done that, but definitely that is a big field of research. And yeah, so hearing impaired children, the earlier they're exposed to ASL, the better. I mean, every child benefits from linguistic exposure. And if you have no linguistic exposure, then you can't kind of grow a language. So it requires, in other words, just like a seed needs water and soil and sunlight, the language seed needs input. And so if you have a hearing impaired child, then their input has to be in the manual modality, but they need that, as early as you can get it to them. So yeah, there's a big literature about that issue. And yeah, it's extremely important to give deaf kids exposure to language. On the other hand, there's also a literature showing that, just to show the property of the language seed again, that hearing impaired kids who have parents who learned ASL late as adults, those adults, like any second language learner, are going to make errors. They're going to speak kind of in a quasi-systematic, but not quite perfect way. And what they find is that the ASL speaking kids will correct those errors. They'll kind of regularize the system and acquire ASL the way it should be, rather than the way it's actually presented to them. So again, you see that internal structure of the child shaping their environment and kind of filtering out the stuff that they can recognize as not fitting the pattern.
Oh, that's so interesting. And thank you, Amanda. She dropped in the chat some research that's actually being done at Gallaudet University around this topic. So that's really exciting. And I missed a question earlier. I'm not sure that you mentioned this, but for a child who's bilingual or learning two languages at once that have different structures, what does that look like in this research?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So for a long time, people were worried that if they exposed their kid to two languages, that they would somehow be delayed in both. And that does not seem to be the case. So the kids learning two languages, really by the time they're 4 or 5 months old, can separate out. They know which language is which, and they know which properties go with which language, and they don't mix them together. So bilingualism it's kind of it's a mystery. Even trilingualism, like kids can be exposed to multiple languages, and of course that will reduce a little bit the words that they hear in each language. But as far as the structural properties go, it seems like they acquire those at the same rate as kids who are only learning one language.
That's interesting. I have heard that before too from parents that were concerned. Just, if we're doing two at once, does that mean it's not happening as fast? But that's helpful to hear. Another question about your research. I mean, when you were conducting all these studies, what were some of the biggest challenges for you during this? I mean, were they around working with some of the children and just making sure you have all the control factors? Or I'd love to hear more about some of the challenges.
Well, the biggest challenge actually is finding babies. Because you can't just like open your lab and say, hey, you know what, we're studying babies, and expect like thousands of people to walk in and want to do it, And so we have a big operation on campus. We now 9 different labs on campus that study child development have combined resources, and we, put out mailings, or we put ads on Facebook or Instagram or through Google, and we just kind of try and make it interesting, try and make it appealing, say, hey, would you like to help science in some way or another? If you would, you can sign up to participate in our database. And then once they're in the database, then when the children are the right age, then we call them up and invite them in. And so like that's kind of the biggest challenge. We probably spend half of our time just trying to get families into the lab, and the other half of our time doing the research. So that's really the biggest challenge. Scientifically, the biggest challenge is always, is there another way to explain this pattern of results? And so like, I'm only showing you kind of the tip of the iceberg here. But typically when we publish a study like any one of these, there will be somebody who says, oh no, you could get that pattern with this other method, and they don't really have the categories, they don't really have the structure. And then we have to do like more experiments, ruling out those alternatives. And so there's like a a big iceberg underneath the surface here.
I'm sure, and you did such a good job just giving us kind of the overarching theme of all of your research. So I appreciate that. But what a great point. I wouldn't have thought about all the marketing that you have to do to get people in the door for these studies. Yeah. You bring up a good point for our Terps that are on the call. I think it'd be wonderful to hear a little bit about your work on campus and where all of this research is taking place, and how the campus is involved in moving this forward through the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our lab is here in Marymount Hall. So the campus, well, I mean, because of the Infant and Child Studies Consortium, that's this consortium of labs that we put together. That's kind of the major contributor, from the campus to try and get this stuff going. At Maryland Day, which is coming up this week, we'll have a tent for families with small kids, so you can come and change a diaper or get a glass of water or learn something about child development. And so, if you're one of those parents who has a baby and you're in the area, come to Maryland Day this week, and we'll talk to you and teach you something if you want to learn something.
I love that, luring people in with the free diapers and the water. That's awesome. And if you wouldn't mind, would you mind just stopping your screen share? I think the slide's just a little blurry, so then you and I can just be on the full screen.
Oh, yeah.
And we did have a wonderful question. Perfect. We had a wonderful question come in from Mary around, I'm going to read the whole thing, but what role do siblings play along with parents in the development of language? And she has a little bit of background here. So her mom believes that her two oldest brothers, who were 15 months apart, had their own language and could understand each other around the toddler stage. Interesting question.
That is a really interesting thing. So there's two things to say. So one is that siblings and other kids the same age have a huge impact on child's language development. So if, especially in the area of accent. So if you're in my case, I'm from New York, and I talk one way, and my kids were raised here in Maryland, and they have Maryland accents, they don't have my accent. And so they're impacted by the broader environment, not by the thing that they get more of, which is talk from me and from my wife. So that's, I think, a place where kids play a big role. Now siblings, it's really hard to say. Lots of people report this idea that 2-year-olds, if they're close in age, that they understand each other, they have this special language. It's not totally obvious how you would know, because you have these two kids who are roughly the same age, they do stuff together all the time. There's a lot of kind of social pragmatic reasoning about what the other kid wants and what they're up to that might give you the appearance that they're understanding the sentences, but really what they're understanding is just kind of the intentions behind those sentences, and so it's just very hard to tell. But yeah, it's definitely the case that that lots of parents report when their kids are close together in age like that, that there's some special bond that they seem to understand each other better than they understand other people. And I don't think it's been studied kind of systematically to see exactly how they do it.
I'd be interested to learn about those studies if they come up. Kind of a part two of that is, have you done any research, or are you familiar of any research just about the babbling stage for babies? I know that's different than kind of the 18-month stage, but kind of what role babbling plays in the process. Yeah,
so so in our lab, we haven't done anything with babbling, but there is, of course, an enormous literature about that. And it's interesting. So babies in the very, very beginning, they will produce a very small number of sounds, ba, 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 and that's probably because those are the muscles that are the easiest to move, the jaw is the biggest muscle. And if you think about how babies, when they first learn to walk, they're they walk kind of like Frankenstein, it's all from the hips, and all the fine motor detail, that's not there. And so that's probably the same with the vocal apparatus, that you start with the big muscles and you work your way down to the smaller muscles. Now, as they develop though, the number of sounds that they produce increases to a very wide range, and they'll start producing any of the sounds in any of the world's languages. And then that will start to restrict down to just the sounds that are used in the language that they're being exposed to. And so you see this interesting kind of growth of the number of sounds that doesn't seem to be triggered by the environment. And then the environment has this kind of narrowing effect.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I'm wondering what role that plays as someone's maybe being exposed to two languages. So then they start to narrow down maybe from those two languages that they're exposed to versus maybe just a one.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But what's interesting is they don't seem to mix, you know? So like if they're babbling, you can tell, are they babbling in English or are they babbling in French or whatever, you know, like you can tell. It's pretty cool.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Well, this has been such a fun dialogue. I'll leave the chat open for just a second to see if we have any last minute questions, but do you have any final remarks, Dr. Lids, to share with your, the TERP alumni community?
No, just thanks for coming in. And if you're in the area and you have a baby, please sign up for Infant and Child Studies research, because we'd love to have you. And it's a fun thing for your kids and it's a fun thing for you.
Lovely. Well, that's awesome. I will send everyone a way for them to contact you or reach out to you in the research that you're doing. So just a huge thank you to you for sharing your research and sharing the great work that you're doing. It was really, really interesting. I know we got some thank yous in the chat and some excitement there. So thanks again for joining us and for taking time with us. And thanks to all the TERPs that joined in on this conversation. And we hope to see you all at the next one. So thank you. And it looks like we got a last minute question as I'm wrapping up. I got you, Mary. She's got one more if you're with me, Dr. Lids. We can do one more. Do you see this question? What role does music? Yeah.
Well, you know, people like music at all ages. And so like that's a way of engaging kids. And of course, since songs have lyrics, then that's a way of them getting words and kind of getting practice. So yeah, absolutely. Music plays a role. And it's interesting. I read this paper a couple of years ago about whether babies can distinguish music from speech, like when somebody's singing versus when they're talking. Because, you know, when we talk, we have these big pitch excursions when we're talking to babies. You know, child-directed speech is different than adult-directed speech. And if you examine the acoustics of child-directed speech and singing, they're very, very similar. But still babies know the difference, you know? And so that's kind of another interesting thing about language and music. So they can keep them separate, but nonetheless, music is a great way to give kids exposure to language.
Very interesting. Well, good last minute question. I'm glad Mary got that in. Well, wonderful. Thank you again, Dr. Lids, and thanks everyone for joining us. Again, hope to see you at the next one, and go Terps. Bye, everyone. Have a good week.
Everybody.